What scares you more? A dead person or a house that's very much alive? Most haunted house stories focus on the ghosts inside, but I just finished 2 books that completely flip that script. These aren't stories about houses that happen to be haunted. These are stories where the houses themselves are the main characters, and trust me, that changes everything. Today, we're diving into The September House and We Live Here Now, 2 Gothic tales that prove sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what's lurking in the shadows, but the walls that keep the shadows in. Hi, I'm Anna, and this is Tucker, and we hope you're having a fabulous spooky season and a great day. First, let me set the stage for what makes these books special. Most haunted house stories follow a pretty predictable pattern. Family moves in, discovers tragic history, encounters angry spirits, and then either defeats the ghosts or flees. The house is basically just a container for spooky things to happen inside. But what happens when the house itself becomes the antagonist? When the architecture, the rooms, the very foundation becomes a character with its own agenda? That's exactly what both of these books explore, and they do it in completely different ways. Now, just because these books have different approaches doesn't mean that they don't share some common ground. Both of these books feature absolutely gorgeous Gothic Victorian homes, the kind that are every female main character's dream, until they're not. One sits in the American landscape and the other in the English countryside. Both may need some minor repairs and renovations, but these aren't crumbling ruins. They're functional, beautiful homes that just happen to have very dark secrets. Both stories feature recent home purchases by couples hoping for fresh starts. Both have narrators you can't quite trust to tell you the whole truth. And both hide family secrets that run much deeper than supernatural activity. But here's where they diverge completely in their approach to terror. Let's start with The September House, which I experienced as an audiobook. This book opens with what might be the most refreshingly sarcastic narrator I've encountered in horror. She's dealing with poltergeist activity, doors slamming, objects moving, the usual supernatural repertoire. But she approaches it with this deadpan, almost annoyed practicality. It's very snarky, very refreshing, very different. And what makes this especially fascinating is that to our narrator, these ghosts are completely corporeal. She interacts with them as if they are real, living people. There's even a housekeeper ghost whose services apparently came with the house. Imagine purchasing not just a Victorian home, but also its supernatural staff. The title isn't just atmospheric, it's literal. The haunting activity, beyond the year-round housekeeping, ramps up specifically in September and gets progressively worse throughout the month. There's something about this particular time that awakens or intensifies whatever's embedded in this house's foundation. One of the most unsettling elements comes when the narrator's daughter visits while they're searching for the narrator's missing husband. Our narrator goes to great elaborate lengths to hide the haunting from her daughter, who we're never quite sure whether or not she sees these corporeal ghosts that are so real to her mother or not. This raises uncomfortable questions about reliability that persist throughout the story. What becomes clear is that this American Victorian probably dates back to the 1800s, with pivotal historical elements surrounding that era, isn't just containing evil. It's absorbed it, embodied it, become it. The house has a history of violence that has literally soaked it into its walls, and now it perpetuates that cycle. The poltergeist activity isn't random. It's the house expressing its personality, testing boundaries, asserting control. The genius of this book is how it escalates. What starts as feeling almost cozy, if you can call living with ghosts cozy, that is, becomes increasingly graphic and disturbing. But it never feels like it's trying to be a traditional horror novel. It maintains this almost literary quality even as things get genuinely gruesome. And I got lulled into this comfortable, cozy feeling only to have that completely turned around on me towards the end, where it was just ramping up quite quickly. So don't be fooled. Now let's talk about We Live Here Now, which I read traditionally on paper because I have the book right here. This English manor represents a fresh start for its new owners, purchased recently after the wife suffered a terrible accident that nearly killed her. They're hoping that this beautiful Victorian home will be the beginning of healing and renewal. But early on, we learn that while this particular house may be over a century old, some form of structure has existed on this property for much longer, and that the current building has been reconstructed at least once in its history. The land itself carries this kind of questionable historical significance that becomes increasingly important as the story unfolds. What adds to the unsettling atmosphere is this sense that the previous owners, who are completely unrelated to each other across different time periods, may know more about the property than they're letting on. Whether they're genuinely unaware of important details or they're deliberately withholding information becomes part of the mystery that keeps both the characters and readers in the dark about what's really happening. One of the most effective elements is how the story handles the supernatural experiences. One person is clearly experiencing something unusual, while the other begins to question whether there might be something medically or psychologically wrong with their partner. This creates a persistent tension about what's real and what might be trauma-related delusion. Where the September House takes its time building atmosphere around seasonal patterns, We Live Here Now hits you with rapid-fire, short chapters that keep you constantly off balance. The pacing alone creates tension. You're always anticipating the next shift, the next revelation, the next unsettling moment. This book uses multiple first-person perspectives, which means you're getting the manor filtered through different characters' experiences. Each narrator brings their own unreliability, their own blind spots, their own relationship with whatever's happening in this carefully maintained home. The haunting here is much more subtle than corporeal ghosts and seasonal supernatural surges, but somehow it feels more ominous. There's something about restrained supernatural activity that makes your imagination fill in the blanks in the most unsettling ways possible. This book doesn't lean into graphic horror the way the September House eventually does, but it creates this pervasive sense of wrongness that gets under your skin and it stays there. So, how do these approaches to house as character actually compare? Well, both stories begin with recent home purchases by couples seeking new beginnings. The September House represents an escape or fresh start, while the English Manor is meant to be a healing space after trauma. But both houses have their own agendas that don't align with their owners' hopes for renewal at all. The September House gives us ghosts that are completely real and visible to our narrator. She can interact with them, rely on them, even be annoyed by them, and frequently is annoyed by them. We Live Here Now keeps its supernatural elements much more ambiguous and subtle, creating dread through what you don't see rather than what you do. The September House reveals its nature through direct supernatural interaction and seasonal patterns. The ghosts are communicative. The rules are clear through experience. We Live Here Now maintains its mystery through evasive previous owners and the gradual realization that the land itself has questionable historical significance that no one seems willing or able to fully explain. Both books make you question what's really happening, but in different ways. The September House raises questions when the narrator's daughter appears to not be able to see the corporeal ghosts her mother interacts with daily. We Live Here Now creates doubt through one partner's experiences versus the other's concern about medical or psychological explanations. The September House operates on a seasonal cycle. September specifically triggers intensified haunting, creating an annual pattern of supernatural activity. We Live Here Now seems more concerned with historical layers, the reconstruction, the way unconnected owners across different time periods each seem to hold pieces of a puzzle that they're not sharing. There's something interesting about how each book uses its setting. The American Victorian carries the weight of relatively recent violence and dysfunction. It's absorbed human evil within living memory. The English manor has layers of mystery preserved across unconnected owners, with its supernatural elements possibly tied to the land's questionable historical significance that remains deliberately obscure. And speaking of revelations, both books have major discoveries that completely reframe everything you think you understand about the supernatural activity. Now, I'm not going to spoil either of these things, but I will say that both authors definitely earned their plot twists through careful groundwork rather than pulling them out of thin air. So what makes these books feel so fresh in a crowded horror market? Now, I'll admit, I don't read as many ghost stories as I probably should, or maybe as many as you do, but these felt genuinely innovative in their approach to familiar tropes. Instead of focusing on who died and why they're angry, both books ask, what happens when a location becomes inherently supernatural? How does architecture itself become malevolent or purposeful? Neither book feels like it's trying to be the next big scary blockbuster. They're more interested in psychological complexity, unreliable narration, and family dysfunction than pure scares. But that literary approach makes the supernatural elements feel more grounded, more believable, and therefore more unsettling. Both authors understand their Gothic traditions. American Gothic, with its focus on recent violence and family trauma, versus English Gothic, with its weight of centuries and possibly ancient knowledge. These houses become repositories for their respective cultural forms of dysfunction and carefully preserved secrets. So, which one should you read, and in what order? If you prefer your horror with a side of dark humor and you don't mind things getting graphic, start with The September House. The audiobook performance is excellent, and the narrator's voice really enhances that sarcastic tone. If you prefer psychological dread over gore, or if you like faster-paced reading with frequent chapter breaks, go with We Live Here Now first. The multiple perspectives and subtle horror create a different but equally effective sense of unease. But honestly, I'd recommend reading both because they complement each other beautifully. They're exploring similar concepts: houses as characters, unreliable narrators, family secrets, but from completely different cultural and supernatural angles. Together, they showcase how flexible and innovative haunted house stories can be when authors are willing to abandon traditional formulas. The best haunted house stories make you never want to live alone again. And if you really want to complete the trifecta after reading both books, or listening, because I can personally vouch for this September House audiobook being very good. It's not the best narration I've ever heard, but it's definitely above average. You should go watch episodes 4 and 5 of Netflix's new show, True Haunting. And no, this is not sponsored content, I swear. I just happened to watch it with my daughter last weekend, and we both were intrigued by how well it pairs with these books' approaches to houses as active supernatural entities. These books made me realize that sometimes the most terrifying possibility isn't that your house might be haunted. It's that your house might be alive, with its own agenda its own personality, and its own plans for the people living inside it. Both The September House and We Live Here Now prove that there's still room for innovation in horror literature, especially when authors are willing to ask, what if the house isn't just where the story happens, but who the story is actually about? Have you read either of these? What's your favorite haunted house story where the building itself feels like a character? Let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for my next architectural nightmare to explore. If you like this video, don't forget to tell me by hitting that like button, and subscribe if you want to see more videos just like this one. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all the support. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye.